Hey, folks. Matt here at the top of the show. Just a heads up that I made a mistake, and I somehow deleted the original show notes file. And so if you are hearing this, there's a new one. It's in the show notes of this here episode. I'm not sure what I'm going to do about all the old shows that reference a show notes document that doesn't exist anymore, but just know that all the show notes are preserved in a single Google Doc that is attached to this episode and all of the ones in the future, and I'm a big dummy. So I apologize for my behavior. The people responsible have been sacked. Enjoy the episode.
You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG. Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. Today on the show, we discuss designing Shadowdark classes. Well, hello there, sages and adventurers. We are back from our vacation / hiatus, and my name is Matt. And with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague, Jody. Jody, how are you doing after a month off from Dungeon Master Diaries? And are you excited?
Dude, I contain multitudes.
Multitoads.
Multitoads. You can't tell I'm out of practice because first word out of my mouth was
a witch spell.
Speaking of that, of witches, I am both filled with rage and a creative impulse to create. Destroy and create. Law and chaos, one might say.
You have a song in your heart and you're going to sing it.
No, that should never happen.
All right, Jody. This says quick back and forth here in the old show notes, and we might have pushed the limit on that. So today's episode focuses on our analysis of designing Shadowdark classes, specifically through the lens, though, Jody, of the core rulebook's core 4 classes. So we're going to talk a lot about the core 4, and right from the get-go, that's what we mean, the core 4 classes in the Shadowdark rulebook and how we can use those as a methodology or how we can think about designing classes in relationship to those 4. So you've got a song in your heart, you've got some creativity, you've got to get on the page, Jody. Tell me about it in this week's Take Us to the Table segment.
Will do. I've been running my Salt Marsh kind of open-y, sandboxy adventure thing for a little bit now, and my wife's been playing a barbarian, which is not a class that is in the core rulebook or currently any of the Curse Scroll zines for Shadowdark. So we began the process of creating what might a barbarian look like? How might we approach this problem? Or this class, not problem per se. And we went back and forth for a while. We've tried a bunch of different designs. Matt, you and I kicked back and forth various ideas of what that might look like. We did the things the internet will tell you, which is to go grab the Pit Fighter from Curse Scroll or go look at these other excellent third-party products that have something like that out there. And at the end of the day, we ended up in a situation at the table that after the game, my wife, who was playing the barbarian, came to me and said, I didn't like that went down as it did. And what had happened was there was an assassination attempt on an NPC that they have a very close alignment and have tied their fortunes to. The assassination attempt failed, but then they were, of course, trying to capture the bandits and the attempted assassin. The assassin used its bandits and thugs to get in the way of our heroes. And our fighter, Gravel, who plays alongside my wife's barbarian, Ufta, our fighter said, hey, can I sacrifice my turn so that Ufta can make the one attack that we're going to get at this assassin before the assassin slips away into the shadows? And we played it out at the table, and that's how it went. And thankfully, for me, as the GM, the thug did his job and got in the way and paid the price with his life, but the assassin got away for future stories. But after the game, my wife and I were sitting and chit-chatting about how did it go, and that was fun, and all right, cool, all's good. And she brought up that she was like, I didn't like that Gravel gave up his turn so I could take a swing. And I said, yeah, but mathematically, the player was right. He made the right call. You had a better chance to land that killing blow. And that spun into a greater conversation about the thing that any class design conversation gets back to of, so if you make a barbarian, are you just making a better fighter?
All right, Jody, let us gather around the fire and discuss sort of a central issue in Shadowdark. So I'm going to tee up here with a little bit of context. So I think when people come to Shadowdark, there's a whole host of things that sort of grab their attention. But when people start designing for Shadowdark, or when they start thinking about ways to expand the game, even if they're not designing stuff themselves or homebrewing stuff themselves, almost immediately, the first thing that people want is more classes. They open up the core rulebook and they see 4 classes, and they think, well, certainly there must be more, and there are, and the curse scrolls and, like you said, the many third-party products. That is sort of the core, if you will, of the issue, though, is it manifested in your take us to the table story, and we see it all the time when people are excitedly bringing their classes to public spaces in which people are talking about the game. So what I want to ask you is, if we're interpreting this problem, or maybe it's not even a problem, like you said, maybe it's just more of a challenge of designing classes in the face of the core 4. What do you see as the challenge? Or if there is a problem there, what do you see? Where does the friction come from, I guess is what I'm saying.
There's a legacy question here also that is part of the core problem or consideration. Dungeons and Dragons has had multi-classes and multi-classing and multiple ways to approach how your character does what they do in the world from jump. I mean, even if you go to the very beginnings of the fighting man and the wizard and then go kind of one step past that, well, we have elves and dwarves as classes and halflings, hobbits as classes, and we have, even when race as class was a thing, that opened it up very quickly. It is kind of the natural first step. And if somebody is coming from 5e, oh boy, there is, I mean, every character class takes how many pages to explain?
Right. They have subclasses that create permutations and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it keeps going. So the expectation around D20 fantasy, if there are classes, is that there will be many options to choose from.
Yeah. And I mean, and therein lies the rub.
And away we go.
Right. Because basically, here's the problem as I see it, kind of building on what you just said. What I see is people will see these classes. I mean, let's take the fighter, since that's kind of what we were talking about. We were talking about a fighter giving up their turn in your game so that a barbarian, this homebrew barbarian class character could have a better statistical chance of taking out this particular enemy. Well, my question, I guess, around this whole thing is like, what do people see when they read the fighter in the rule book, right? What they see is a single page class. The spread, literally one full page is artwork, and there's only a handful of abilities. Like, there's only a little bit of text given to the fighter. So what that, I think, signals at first blush is that, well, certainly then the fighter must be fairly specific, right? Like, it doesn't have very many abilities. It can't do much, right? It doesn't have a particularly wide breadth or scope. And that's, for me, that's the friction that I see is, and I am going to say that it's kind of a lack of understanding of what the core 4 classes are designed to do in terms of the niches that they are designed to fill, which are actually much broader than I think people give them credit for when they look at them initially. I will say, like, you know, we were pretty fast to add the Ranger and the Bard. I'm sure we'll get to talking about those. But my central sort of tenet, I want to plant my flag here, is that as soon as you add another class, you essentially, you are going to make one of the core 4 classes, you're going to invade their niche. It's almost impossible not to. I can think of almost no class. Actually, I can't think of any class that doesn't in some way trample on the niche of one of the core 4 if you add it to your game. And so let's dive into the Barbarian, though, and use that as a case study. Tell me a little bit about, like, how you and I have had so many conversations about the Barbarian, but, like, distill those conversations out in terms of, like, our thought processes, where we agreed, where we disagreed, or take it in whatever direction you want, but give me kind of some perspective on where we found issues, where the friction was, and where you've ended up. Because I think you've ended up in a place that you are actually kind of satisfied with for the time being. Of course, all of this exists under the banner of, here at Dungeon Master Diaries, we don't believe that any homebrew or anything really is a sacred cow or anything like that. Everything can be changed, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, including what's in the very lovely black book that Kelsey has given us all, or, you know, produces for us all to buy. So I'm going to skip to the end because we would be here for, and I'm not kidding, hours if I went through the thought process of every permutation we've gone through on this. Where we started and where I've ended is, in both instances, 2 different places. That was a very confusing sentence. Let me unpack that. At the beginning of you and I designing and bouncing ideas back and forth, we went, okay, so how is the Barbarian class unique, and what is the Barbarian fantasy? Mm-hmm. Okay, so once you say, this is what I believe the Barbarian idea is. Luckily, a Barbarian's great because almost everybody goes, Conan the Barbarian, Conan movies.
It's sort of in the name.
Yeah, like, okay, that's this image. We all go, okay, we want to make that thing. Or we're looking at 5e rules. Mm-hmm. Well, suddenly we've got 2 very different design philosophies now. If we're looking at 5e barbarians and Grog from Critical Role, that's a very different thing than actually sword and sorcery barbarian Conan. Okay, shoot. So what are the abilities we're going to give this class? And you start designing new abilities to give to the class, and you move forward in that thinking. The 2 lanes you end up in there is, what is the Barbarian's class and what are its new abilities? So, excuse me, what is the Barbarian
barbability?
Barbabilities. Whoa, I need to warm up. What is the Barbarian fantasy and what are the Barbarian class abilities? Those are the 2 roads we headed down. That sounds totally reasonable. Now on the other end of this, those 2 premises are kind of flawed, actually. The question, and to expand on your notion of, like, anytime you add a class, you're actually cutting into the niche of one of the core 4. So the Barbarian is a melee class, that it is a combat class in the same way a fighter is. What I realized in you and I talking about that and you kind of sharing that perspective with me was it's an exponential cutting. It's not a, like, oh, it's a little bit of a hedging in on the fighter space. No, you've literally cut it in half now. If there's 2 martial classes to pick from, the space the fighter could take up, the lane of a highway, if you will, that's kind of the metaphor I think of, is we have a 4-lane highway. 1 lane is for fighting people. That's called the fighter class. Well, now I've cut that lane in half because there's 2 in there. What I've looked at now is going, okay, so the Barbarian is a very specific kind of homebrew fighter. It's still a fighter class. Hey, player who is playing this particular Barbarian in this campaign, who is, and my wife's Barbarian dwarf is named Ufta, and she's very Midwestern vibe, and this character has comedically just really come into its own. And who is Ufta? What is an Ufta? Who It's oofed. Like it's the
Sure.
Yeah, and we started designing. It's a fighter that is this singular version, and so we've designed a class that is uniquely built for that player. And the beauty of this was, well, through learning, through downtime, through giving up parts of my character class, I could take on new and different things. And that's kind of an interesting way to approach this. Now, the other side of that is, okay, but that barbarian is built bespoke for all of my home rules, all of our campaign setting, the player who's going to use it and how they interact with mechanics. My wife will use mechanics like any gamer will. However, it has to be through lens of story. She will completely ignore mechanics and tactical advantages if the story doesn't say that seems reasonable.
Right.
Like she will not do the like tactically optimal thing unless in her mind the story plays out that way, which is not a bumpers. If you're creating a mass produced, everybody play this class this way, you just can't do that.
Yeah. So I'll take a few of those things and just kind of give you my perspective on it. And you can tell me if you feel like, because I do want to go back, because so just to give listeners kind of some context, like I basically stopped designing the barbarian. I got tired of it. I got annoyed by it, and was like, you know what, Jody, like we've gotten it to a point where like I kind of came to the conclusion, I don't want to bury the lead here. My argument is I don't want a barbarian class. I don't need one because we have a fighter. So more on that later. But in the arc of getting to the point where I was like, Jody, I think you actually have a better take on this, and what you're doing with it is just working out, and I just want to kind of see where you end up. What I was trying to do was essentially emulate other works, whether it's 5th edition or whatever, specifically because I think a lot of people do this, because we were playing with people who at the time had 5th edition backgrounds, and we were trying to like bring them over. Rage, like the terminology of rage is very easy to internalize as a player. Like, rah, I am raging, and so it felt evocative. And it felt like 5th edition especially had like arrived at some terminology and some mechanics that were like kind of cool, and they seemed to work. And I think ultimately what I realized in that arc was, first and foremost, that trying to back a 5th edition class into Shadowdark is ostensibly just a fool's errand. Not because it never works, but because the ethos of design is so different that you're constantly going to be trying to, square peg round hole problem, right? So that was the first learning, and the first friction that I really felt was just, I was like, oh, what am I trying to do here? Like, I'm very clearly trying to make something that this is not. I think underneath all of that, and this is where I want to see where your reaction is. I have arrived at this place where I don't actually think you need anything more than the core 4 classes. And in fact, I think adding classes, the more classes that you add, the like functionally the less value. It is such a huge like your return on investment or your marginal gains in terms of the value that an individual class adds. It rounds off pretty quick, right? And this is why Kelsey has said time and time again that the Cursed Scroll classes aren't supposed to be throw them all in as a gestalt whole. They're supposed to be sequestered off into regions where they make sense. And I have really kind of fervently become a believer in that, because having played a fairly long-term game, I have seen the additional classes potentially actually narrow the capability of those core 4 classes, making them less useful, making them feel redundant. And these classes, this is my final point,
I believe that the core 4 classes should always be the sort of best in class. Like if you want to hit stuff with a sword or shoot stuff with a bow really, really well, you should always play a fighter. If you want to sneak around and pick locks, etc., you should always play a thief, etc., etc. If you want a book of spells, play a wizard, whatever. But as soon as you start adding classes, you start not just trampling on the niches, but you eventually get into this class balancing question. And that ended up being the death knell for me, was it wasn't possible to make a barbarian that felt like it was comparable, or at least it didn't pale in comparison to the fighter, while also making sure that the fighter didn't become obsolete, which is essentially what your story was describing. So I don't know if any of that rings true for you.
I've come around to that way of thinking almost entirely as well. However, then there's a problem with that line of thinking and application.
Totally.
And the problem, I'm going to digress and come back.
Yeah.
Hang with me on this one. The favorite character as a player I have ever played is a character who is largely known by the other players at the table as Doc. It was a 5e campaign, and we played for a year plus, really, this campaign every 2 weeks, long run campaign. And after we finished the campaign and we were all sitting around and laughing and going, oh, we killed the mind flayers out in outer space, and it was crazy, and it was a great, very 5e kind of adventure. I asked the other players at the table, hey, do you guys know what class Doc is? And every person was like, no, I have genuinely been curious. And they guessed, and every guess was wrong. And I partly loved that because that's just how I like to play, is playing a little, not against type, but I always like to have a weird quirk with my characters. It keeps me coming back to see how the weird quirk evolves.
Yes.
This guy was weird. He was based exclusively, just for reference, on Christopher Lloyd's portrayal, somewhat as Dr. Emmett Brown from Back to the Future, but more so as Jim from Taxi was his affect. So it was a lot of fun to do that voice for those who knew that very niche little call out. He was a priest, and he was a healer priest.
Yeah, he was a life cleric.
A life cleric. The most generic cleric that there is. I'm a cleric and I heal. That's what I do in 5e parlance. And genuinely at the end of the campaign, nobody knew. The reason I say that and I bring that character into this conversation is I didn't do anything that was mechanically strange. In fact, I limited a couple things. I would only use them in particular ways.
It's nothing like having your healer like kneecap themselves for the purposes of obfuscating their class.
Well, I don't think it ever cost us terribly.
No, I don't think so.
But the point being is I played this hyper generic kind of the cliche of cliche clerics, a healer life path cleric. And nobody could tell just because of how I chose to put the wrapping around it. Wasn't less effective, wasn't any of those things. And if you take that same mindset to designing Shadowdark classes and you encourage your players to go, hey, these are the rules, but how you wrap that is entirely up to you. For some players, that's really easy, and for some, that's entirely unsatisfying.
Right.
And the reason it's unsatisfying is there's no mechanical bite to it. And if your play group is a play group that really lives in the world of tactics and mechanics and numbers, then those players, if you're going to follow us down this thought path of you only need the core 4, if you're going to follow us down that road, then you're also asking your players to have to be designers. If they want something else different or more, then they're going to have to do design work. And that was actually the fascinating conclusion kind of this whole UFTA barbarian design. My wife does not like doing design. You and I love game mechanic design, especially with like streamlined game systems.
Sure.
She doesn't. This is not a thing she's into. However, she said, I want this character to work different. And I kind of laid out to her like, okay, it can work different. We can come up with what is this barbarian's ability, but there has to be some give and take. We can't just add on to the fighter writ large.
Yeah.
Like we need to do something else, especially if we start talking about rage and adding damage, which is one of the mechanical sacred cows of Shadowdark is boosting people's damage in melee.
The fighter be doing that.
Yeah, it is his thing. And if you go, oh, I'm a fighter, but I get to add my strength to all of my damage rolls, you've lopsided the mechanics of the game all over the place.
Right.
Like it really stops working. So that's where I'm saying to go back to your kind of original, like, hey, you just need these core 4, and then you can kind of color and flavor them to do what they're going to do. And through downtime and through learning and through all these and gear acquisition, you can start becoming Aragorn. You can start becoming Radagast. You can start becoming, Rick Sanchez, whatever it is you want to be, you can start becoming that. But if you're only using those 4 core classes, your players have to be willing to engage in the conversation with you about like, okay, so what are the mechanics? And this is really just me. What are you giving up? What are you willing to give up? So my wife gave up a ton of fighter stuff to go, I want to be able to rage and do more damage. When she gets angry, I want her to do more damage. Okay, that's a pretty barbarian-y thing to want. You're going to have to give up some stuff then. Like to get this damage spike, there has to be a trade-off.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just a better fighter.
Right. And so I believe the conclusion you came to was dropping the plus to hit and causing some damage at the end of the rage.
Shall I go through it? Shall I give folks the thing?
So, okay. Actually, before you do that, I want to actually have a conversation about this because the thing that we're talking about here, so we will get there. We'll get to like our to your rules. I think the class is great, but I do think that there's like an elephant in the room which is that I kind of alluded to this earlier, which is that the first thing that people do when they come to Shadowdark and they start designing stuff is they start designing classes, and inevitably those classes find their way to discussion forums, Discord, Facebook, Reddit, etc. It's all good. However, there are a few things that end up being fairly common, what I would say are mistakes. Most of them are in terms of like creating a class that has an ability or a combination of abilities that just make it functionally better than one of the core 4. But actually, there's something else before you share your rules, which is that often the classes don't come with any context. Like this is what I wanted. The most common one that we see usually is a spellblade, right? A gish, or right? Is that the correct? Like a class basically that can both fight and cast spells,
right?
Which to me is anathema to basically everything that I want out of the game. Like,
let's come back to that because through this lens, I now have an answer for that.
Well, right, and I this is a personal flaw. We're getting very far afield here.
No, I don't. But like, keep going with this. I think it's important.
Just don't like spell blade, spell sword wielding classes because they to me are symbolic of the players wanting everything. Like, I don't want to have any trade-offs. I want to be able to hit somebody really hard with my sword, and I want to be able to cast magic missile. And it's like, okay, that sounds to me like you want to have you don't want there to be a niche. You want your niche to be a circle that's full of just you. Yeah. We can't do that. That's not how this particular class-based game works. Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox. That's how I feel about it. I know that there's probably some good solutions out there. What I see more often than not in these classes is a lack of explanation, not of what the player wanted. I don't care what the player wanted. I can see that in the class. What I want is, what is your table culture and what is the style of play at your table? Like, do you have any house rules that these things are going to interact with? Because when you talk about your
your design, inevitably, like folks who've listened to the show kind of understand where we're coming from, the kinds of games that you run, the kinds of games that I run, and hopefully they can run, even if you don't explain it in full, they can run it through those lenses and process it that way. And for folks who are maybe new and who are just coming to the show, Jody will, of course, give you that context. But putting you on the spot. All that is to say that oftentimes there is not a disclaimer about this is the way we play the game. And that, to me, is the biggest problem with classes, is they assume that the person who's reading them understands what the goal of a particular table's playstyle is. Like, is the playstyle supposed to be heroic and kind of over the top? And is the whole purpose of this to just outclass the core four and create classes that are more powerful? Okay, well, you need to tell us that. So this is just a PSA for folks who are presenting their classes to the world, that like it is very helpful not to talk about what the player was looking for, but very specifically to present like the context in which this class is going to exist at the table, and to do a little bit of like that kind of contextualizing and kind of add some nuance there. But anyways, with that disclaimer and aside, and me now bringing us all the way back to where we began, Jody, would you tell us a little bit about this barbarian class?
I'd be happy to. So the one I'm going to share here is my wife's barbarian class for our home campaign. If I were going to make a barbarian class that was for general use and consideration, which we can put in the show notes you can check it out. I have that. I'll show it. I don't think it's great. It's a draft. Go nuts. I just want to be clear. It's a barbarian class, and I think it works. This one that I'm going to share now is the one that was designed for our home game. The design goals that I set out with my wife was that rage has to be central. This character gets angry, and she kind of flips a switch. Normally, the character is kind of mild-mannered and this Midwestern farm girl, and she's kind of cute and pets the rabbits. And then she gets this like WWE vibe of gonna break stuff and off the turnbuckle, and that's when she goes nuts. So rage had to be the central thing. And because she is jacked farm girl, is the dwarven story here, the rage is about smash things. So the class design purpose is I want a fighter that smashes the snot out of things when it rages. Okay. So we have to give damage. So here is the breakdown of how we got there. Weapons. All melee weapons are on the board and fair to use, and you may only use thrown weapons as your ranged weapons. Armor is limited to leather armor and shields only. It's kind of the classic natural, and this has this natural story of this farm girl. Hit points remain at the D8 in alignment with a fighter. We did play test a D10. It's too many.
Yeah, it is. It's very sad.
The Barbarian class has a class ability called Indomitable, which is frankly just grit, but it applies to con. The Barbarian is a hardy folk and this tough farm girl in this instance. So we went, you know what? You use Constitution. So if you make a con check, instead of grit or dex, or strength or dex, you can use it on Constitution. Here's our first really massive change. They have an ability called Heavy Weapons Master as opposed to Weapons Master. You gain +1 to damage with two-handed melee weapons. In addition, add half your level to those damage rolls round down. Now here's the Rage ability. On your turn, you can choose to enter a rage. Well, in a rage, add your strength to your melee damage rolls. At the end of combat, your rage ends, and you take D4 damage. You cannot rage again until you have rested. And this was her design. This was her idea of like, so what happens at the end of a rage? Well, she's pooped. And we kept trying different things of like exhaustion mechanics that we use at our table and different ideas. And what we settled on is, nope, you take D4 damage. And it doesn't say minimum 1 or anything like that. So yeah, if the barbarian's down to their last few hit points, she could collapse and die. And just, fights. That's kind of classic too, though, of like, no, the barbarian fights through their grievous wounds and they keep going. And then at the end they collapse, and that would create that mechanic. And also it's, there's a trade-off onto hit, but you get this huge damage spike. I mean, that is a ton of damage with a two-handed weapon, plus, you're adding your strength, plus the weapons master that would be on any fighter, really. But to get that weapon damage pop, you had to give up armor, you had to give up flexibility, you had to give up a lot of things.
Yeah, and that plus to hit's reasonable too. I mean, so, and I can hear people being like, but what about this thing? And it's like, the purpose of this class is not, I think the purpose of this discussion, is that this works for you, it works for the player, it works for your table. And discussions about whether or not it's balanced are irrelevant because it's not for this. This isn't the public version of what you would put out for a barbarian. This is what you've decided, at your table, and it can change. The thing that I can hear people saying is, but D4 damage is not going to be that big of a deal when they're level 9, and it's it's like, okay, well then cross that bridge when it comes to it. And I think that the other component of this is that we both work with very collaborative players, and sometimes those players are collaborative in a way that we design things with them that are underpowered or overpowered. And the agreement is always that we reserve the right to come back and adjust this. And if the class ends up being underpowered or overpowered, you will be able to have that conversation with her or any of your players. And I think that ultimately that's kind of what I think is valuable about designing classes is that if you're doing it in a vacuum, that ends up being something much different than offering your players an opportunity at the very least to say, hey, describe to me in just plain language what you want to do.
Right.
You and that's exactly what you did. It was like, well, what does this character do? She hits stuff really, really hard. Okay, great. We can work with that and we can go places with it. The other thing that I think is kind of lovely is that you just use the fighter class as a base and moved on from there. And you already talked about this, but you can really see that maybe this doesn't work, maybe it doesn't for other people, but using the class that most closely aligns with what you're trying to do is a great idea. And there's another way to do this, which is learning and downtime.
Right. And that's such a huge part of where I'm at with all this now.
Right. And this is my argument, Jody. So first of all, I want to say that as a disclaimer, I love the learning rules in the core book, mostly because I also don't care about following the strictly rules as written in the core rulebook. If you do, I think the learning rules in the core rulebook fall short because they require that the GM does a lot of heavy lifting. They're based on getting a DC 18 intelligence check, and there's not a whole lot of guidance for what learning should do. I think you and I kind of immediately understood what this was about, but I didn't really see the benefit of it until I started to think about classes and additional classes in the core 4. To me, the absolute best way to create classes is by playing Shadowdark.
Yeah.
Full stop. You select one of the 4 classes from the core rulebook and you say, I'd like to create a ranger. Great. Allow your players to choose the ranger background. Play a fighter. Play a priest. Play any of the core 4 classes. And then start leaning into ranger. And guess what? There is this wonderful trove of potential things you could learn how to do. And if you need inspiration, there's a lot of places to get it. Perhaps from other ranger classes. If you start thinking about the game through what is sometimes referred to as, and I find this term kind of annoying because it feels a little gatekeepy to me, but as somebody who likes writing and words, I like it. It's diegetic, right? This idea that you do it in game and in the story, and that your character is actively engaging in activities and learning things through play rather than through pre-game decision-making about how you built your character. That is my preferred way of designing classes now, is to go, which niche most closely aligns with your play style and where you want your character to get. Choose that, and then let's get there. We just played Deadlands last night and using the Savage World systems. And one of the things that Savage Worlds does, I don't want to get into the mechanics necessarily, but one thing that it does is it has powers, which are their version of ostensibly spells, but they fill a much broader sort of category. And one of the sections in the rulebook is about what they call trappings, which essentially is like there's a generic kind of magic missile equivalent, and it's called like Bolt or something like that, and it just does damage at a distance. There is nothing in the description of the power that says what it looks like, what it does, and so you, as the player, interpret it through the lens of your character. I like that.
Right.
Like that to me feels like a creative exercise for players that could get them somewhere. So I think that's a heavy lift for some players, but I also think, man, there's a lot of potential there. There's also some issues with that, or there's a lot of onus on GMs.
Yeah, there is an amount of, if you're brand new to Shadowdark and you are just trying it out for the first time, this is one of the like bringing 5e players on board hurdles.
Yeah.
Is they're used to having 20, 30, whatever it is, classes plus subclasses, combos. Like there's a bajillion of them. I used to know.
Multi-classing, etc. Yeah.
And then you have 4 options, go. And here are, 5 player ancestries to pick from, go. That feels very limiting until you get to the point where you say, hey, you can do whatever you want now that you did some learning. What does that look like? You want to be a ranger? Maybe you take the ranger background. Maybe you take the herbalist background.
Oh, baby.
And now, oh, look, here's this thing that you seem really smart as GM. You just slide over them like, oh, here's this how herbalism would work if you go looking for something. It's not a ranger class. It's just an herbalism ability. And there are so many cool resources out there for drawing these from. And this isn't, I want to be really clear also that this is not Matt and I in any way dunking on some of the really cool resources out there. I'm going to name 2 of them.
Sure.
Femoria, the Dark Age, has some awesome ancestries and classes in it, specifically Ancestry as class.
Yeah.
Which is a great throwback, a thing I love and could conceivably include in my future game life. And then kind of the first out of the gate, and it's an excellent product, is Unnatural Selection from Dungeon Damsel. That's just a treasure trove of either classes. If you're listening to all this and you're like, and you got this far, and you're like, yeah, but I don't want to do any design work, then don't. There's two things. Go buy them, and you get your cursed scrolls, and you're good. However, if you want things that are more bespoke, if you are interested in doing this design work, those are other designers. Just use those as flavor, use those as a building block. Yeah. And there's one last piece in the design space, just of like talking about this idea of diegetically letting your players build out this very flavored, carve out a new niche in the game that's totally unique to them, which is a good sales point, right?
That's one of the biggest complaints that you hear from 5e players is my character isn't going to be unique. And
I don't have enough options.
The thing you did in the game is the only reason you have this ability, and it's yours and yours alone. Whoa, that's right. Powerful.
I don't have enough options. The counter argument to that is you have unlimited options. What do you want this character to do? Okay, they're level 1. They're just starting out. They're not a hero today. What do you want them to do? What does that look like? Oh, I want them to. You also have a talent table that you can play with.
Sure.
I didn't even get into the barbarian class. I'm going to mention one of them. Sure. So a stock fighter, one of their talents allows them to kind of have an armor mastery. They get an extra AC from armor. Well, that doesn't work on a barbarian class if I took away their ability to wear armor. So that's where I threw in their +1 to hit. You do get a plus to your attack rolls if you roll that one instead, because you can't wear armor, but you also have given up all of your pluses to hit other than your strength. So there's a talent that gives that back. Neat. You mentioned quite a while back about not loving the spell sword,
Yeah, go. Yeah.
So just to kind
Hit me
of
with it.
run through this thought exercise, I feel like this is that idea of a spell sword of some sort was actually when I went, oh, no, I really do agree with start with the core 4, use everything else as flavor, and then get there over time.
Yeah.
Was a spell sword was the decider. There is currently in the core 4 a class that can wield weapons and can wear armor and can cast spells. It's called a priest.
Yep.
What if you changed the word on priest to say spell sword? They can wield swords. They cast spells. They cast spells that make the swords better.
Yeah.
And magical at level 1.
And just, you could do, Jody. I mean, this and
I mean, full stop. I'm done.
Well,
it happened. There it is.
Also, like, okay, I want to cast wizard spells. All right, great. Let's build, just for the sake of argument, what wizard spells you want. Let's build a tier 1 spell sword spell list. And if you want to go grab additional spells, I have a good news for you. There are neutral, lawful, and chaotic wizard spells coming out. Go look at those. Let's build a bespoke level 1, tier 1 spell list just for you and go from there.
But Matt, won't my player just cherry pick all the best spells?
Of course they will. You just make sure that the tier 1 list is shorter and make it a D6 list or a D8 list rather than a D12 list.
And as the GM who is working with your player to custom build to exactly what they want, you go, hey, tell me about what kind of spells you want. Oh, I want like damage spells.
Great.
Okay. And then they go, okay, I'm going to turn invisible. No. What do you mean? It's on the list. It's like, no, it's not. Your patron or whatever, you said you want to do damage. That's not a damage spell.
And if you want to go invisible, great. You're going to have to spend some time learning how to do that.
Yeah. And that process is so organic and so fulfilling.
Yeah.
Like that's the other piece is as a player, it's so deeply fulfilling when you do start designing that. One of the problems, my current ranger player he's awesome. He's an elf ranger. He rolled at the beginning because we roll stats. He rolled lights out, and he's kind of one of my arguments of like this one player on that one day rolled plus, I think, almost everything except charisma.
Right.
And so as a ranger, as Kelsey's designed it, you do need multiple stats to be good to really harness it. Well, he's got them. And the player is literally given me the feedback of like, man, I just kind of wish I could like grow and evolve, but I kind of do what I do. And as the GM that's allowed multiple classes, it's really hard for me to give him a new ability.
Right.
Because the ranger already has a lot of abilities compared to.
I mean, the ranger is basically halfway between a fighter and a priest.
Yeah.
Right? Like it tramples in both of those classes' yards.
Yeah. And it's a phrase I use is paper buttons.
Yeah.
Oh, there are paper buttons on my sheet. And if you think like video game buttons, the ranger has a lot of buttons from jump. There are a lot of things to do, lots of class abilities, lots of things I can roll, the ranger can put themselves into a lot of situations. And in now playing in the Dolmenwood campaign, we've had a very high level ranger there. This ranger is now 5th level I think he's actually the highest level character in the group. And he's got great stats, and over time through talents and whatnot, he just keeps getting better and better. And man, it's a cool character and he can sure do a lot. And it makes it really tough for me to give him anything more like with downtime, just because I'm like, man, it's already so far ahead of the curve. And exactly as you said, Matt, and you're in the fighter's lane and you're in the priest's lane. And it becomes this weird, like diminishing returns.
So I want to talk about two things. First of all, I want to finish with like some cautionary tales, because I do think that there are some negatives to doing what we're describing, to using the core 4, using learning diegetic growth. Okay. But I just want to call out that if people want some examples of classes that can be problematic in the way that we're talking about, the ranger is definitely one. And the thing that the other class that I always go to as an example of this, that isn't necessarily a problem, but is also a class that I just don't necessarily think needs to exist, is the Bard. Why? Because no one, we've talked about this on the program, Jody, no one agrees on what a Bard is. And therefore, any Bard class is going to feel unfulfilling to a whole host of people. So too is a Necromancer class. These are two great examples of classes I do not think can be achieved as individual classes. If you would like examples of how to make them work, there are lots of Bard classes out there. Kelsey has made one. It is in Cursed Scroll 6. And if you'd like a good example of how to do a Necromancer, there is one forthcoming in the Western Reaches, but there is also the Grave Warden in the Unnatural Selection book. They do different things. They are attempting to achieve different fantasies. However, I even designed my own Necromancer at one point. Mm-hmm. I think it is just a better idea to use a wizard for a Necromancer. I think it's just a better idea to use any other class for a Bard and then graft those abilities on as they make sense to you, your group, and the fantasies they're trying to achieve. Now, with that said, there are some problems with what we're talking about. And the first one, and the one that I think is always a problem, is that players inevitably are going to try and get out of failure. Like players don't want to fail. There is this great quote that I have bookmarked on the Discord, Jody, and it comes from the patron saint of Shadowdark, Kelsey herself. And it is essentially just something that she posted at some point in where there was a conversation about designing classes in one of the threads on the Discord. And Kelsey said, whenever a player really, really, really wants something, it usually means it's a bad idea to give it to them. And I think that's ultimately the problem you're going to run into, is if you have players that are trying to use diegetic character growth exclusively to increase the power level to the absolute maximum, etc., then it does break down. I don't know if you have thoughts on this, because you have a much longer and wider breadth of experience in terms of like player behavior.
It is the natural player thing to want to be more powerful, and there's nothing wrong with that desire to be more powerful. I think it's we all do. And exactly as you said, players will try to come up with ways to avoid failure. It's one of my favorite in the last, year plus things I've heard is players will optimize the fun out of any game. And it's fascinating how true it is that given the opportunity.
Not out of malice.
No, far from it. It's, I have found an efficient answer, and how efficient can I be? Look at, this is a weird example, but I think it's true, Super Mario Brothers speedruns. The fact that I can play an entire game of Super Mario Brothers and beat Bowser's Castle in less than 5 minutes is a very strange thing if you kind of zoom out. You're like, so your desire was to have the least amount of time having fun with the game as possible?
Jody, do not get into speedrun culture, because I find speedruns to be lovely and wonderful, and the community is great.
It is, and I am playing a game that is encouraging this behavior right now. That's a new beat 'em up, and I'm really enjoying it. I've had a little video game break in my life. What it is, though, is the player wanting to be more efficient and be good at the thing they're good at.
Right.
And that's a very reasonable thing to want. So as the GM, you have to be willing to say no. You have to be willing to go, that's too far. The other problem that you're going to run into is that you have to understand Shadowdark well enough to be willing to be creative and move away from simply giving advantage to something, or just giving a talent roll to something, or you have to come up with nuanced answers. And you and I, Matt, have the privilege of having run this system quite a bit in the last 3 years. And we do now have a pretty deep understanding of what does and doesn't work. Where can you give it advantages, or advantage literally in the game mechanic sense, and where you can't. And the players are often going to go, hey, with my downtime, I want to get really good at casting lightning bolt. Can I just have advantage on casting lightning bolt? Well, how do luck tokens work at your table? How do insert a million questions from me about, man, I'd be real hesitant to say, yeah, you just become a master of this spell. There's also a talent roll for that. And it's like, well, if you get that talent roll, sure. Could I learn to have a +1 if I have this particular component on hand? Now we're talking. Now, yes, you could learn that if you have a diamond, you can harness light and cast lightning bolt extra well. And that's kind of how I tend to roll is think in terms of a give and take. But I think like I'm starting to get to.
Well, yeah, you're starting to get to the end, but I'm just gonna edge in here and just with my usual caveat of beware of wizards.
Yeah, truly.
just beware of wizards. As you got there eventually. I was like, Jody, are you going to mention the fact that all of this breaks down when you start just giving wizards the ability to just infinitely cast their spells? But alas, I think we have covered a lot of ground. Let us hear from a sponsor. We'll come back. We'll wrap up the show. We probably have, I think, 4 more things to say, maybe 2 each. All right, just want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Adventurers Greens. This is real fuel for real crawlers. None of those fakers. None of those posers that we see just going down to the first level of the dungeon, won't even go down a staircase. No, this is for real adventurers. Look, we all know what it's like to survive on jerky and stale bread for so long that your body starts filing complaints against you. Adventurers Greens, it makes up for all this. It's a scoop of powdered greens. Don't ask where they got it. And it has all the nutrients that you are definitely not getting in a dungeon. Just mix it with water or ale or whatever's sloshing around in your flask from that somewhat curious fountain that you found. More energy, better focus, and back to adventuring. Adventurers Greens. Real fuel for real crawlers. All right, Jody, let's bring this topic into the light with our core takeaways. You're up first.
All righty. When it comes to class design, I think the single most important piece of advice I have learned and that I can give is really to get to the heart of the matter. What exactly is it that the player wants or the class you're designing? If you're just doing I'm going to design classes because it's fun, because it is, you need a singular vision. You need a true North Star that will be the place where you can make your cuts and go, this, yes, fits that, or no, it doesn't. You'll note the barbarian that we discussed. There was nothing about damage soaking. There was nothing about cleave. There was nothing about multi-attack. I want to hit one thing hard. Cool. That's what we're doing then.
All right, my first takeaway is not necessarily a takeaway insofar as it comes from the show, but it's a Reddit post made by Kelsey. We'll link it in the show notes, and it is her thoughts on class design. It's, I think, invaluable. It's amazing, and it's from the person who wrote the dang system. So it ought to be worth your time.
5 excellent points she brings up there. From a design perspective, Matt and I have been pretty lucky in our long-term friendship to do some actual design work and work on actual games and get to refine things and look at specifically, again, games with really tight rule systems. And one of my mantras is, if I'm going to add something, what can I take away? If a player is wanting something really cool or you're wanting to build something new into a class, what can you take away? And you have to have a sense of economy there, right? Of how big is the gain? See earlier discussion about Barbarian and getting to do more damage is a huge deal. Well, you got to give up a lot then. Or is it just kind of a little flavor thing? Well, you don't maybe need to give up anything, but that give and take is a really good framework to live in as you're designing.
All right, and my last one is play the game and then go read some stuff and then keep playing the game and read some stuff. I liken this to people who spend a lot of time watching videos about how to cook or paint miniatures or whatever, and then never really get around to doing the thing. And this is true of so much in our hobby that if you really want to design classes, whether you want to design them with your players or you want to design them for the public, there is absolutely no way to get around the fact that in order to do that well and to fully and completely understand the system, you have to play the game a lot. Fortunately, the game rules.
All right, we are back, but we are out. As the torchlight grows dim, we hope you're able to find something useful in this episode that you can take into a future game. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, you can email us at dmdiariespodcast
It's not that hard, Jody.
gmail.com. You can also reach out via YouTube and Facebook. And best of all, get at us on the Dungeon Master Diaries thread of the Shadowdark Discord channel. You can find links to those feeds and other materials and my fumblings with a barbarian in our show notes. Until next time, may your taverns be light and your shadows be dark.
Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It's produced by Jody Kropholler and by me, Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster, and Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production, is not affiliated with the Arcane Library, LLC. Shadowdark RPG is a part of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023. Boy, howdy, we're crushing it. Just like the barbarian.